Every time I come into contact with a resitting SCS student, I ask them some questions about the past pre-scene. And more often than not, even though it's been a month or two or possibly more, their knowledge of the basic areas of the pre-scene in relation to the company or indeed the industry are limited. It's lacking. Hi everybody, welcome to this first video, our introduction to company for your new SCS case for November 22 and February 23. We're talking about a company called Hottayr. In this particular video, I'm going to take you through what I feel are the 10 key points relating to the company that we need to get under our belt right now. Not next week, not in a few weeks, right now. This first area is basically, what are we dealing with here? Well, we have a manufacturer. We have a quoted manufacturer of boilers and indeed heat pumps. They were established a fairly long time ago. 1952 they incorporated and they became quoted in 1967. Broad split between their two main products, boilers first, heat pumps second, 45% for the boilers, 55% for the heat pumps. In terms of where they stand right now in this market, they're very, very successful. It seems to me they've been ahead of the game for many, many years. There is competition, but this is a very solid, well-established company. That's our first point. Second point is really who. We're talking about the founders. Now, there is zero information on the original founders going back to 1952, but what we certainly do know is they're very much first movers in this market. They were the first companies, if not the first, to introduce domestic boilers into the market. Clearly, as of listing in 1967, they have exited, so they're no longer with the company. Do we know anything about them? Well, I think we can tell a little bit from the mission as shown within the pre-scene. Their mission is to be a trustworthy supplier of excellent heating products. And I wouldn't have thought that that mission has changed much in the last 70 years. Their vision, which is probably more relevant now than it was then, is a zero carbon world. And that whole area of emissions, the environment, 3Ps, etc., I think is very, very important within this pre-scene. More of that later. Our next point is really the business model. And I've sort of touched on it already. I mean, their business model really surrounds supplying excellent heating systems, manufacturing them and selling them both abroad and in the home country of Norland. It seems to me that their focus really from the off has been around areas such as high quality, innovation, a customer focus, being cutting edge, really being at the forefront of changes in this industry. And certainly it has changed over time, albeit fairly slowly. Our fourth point is really their operations. I've said that they're a manufacturer. How do they operate? Well, essentially there's three main areas here. They have two factories and a head office. They have the boiler factory in Central City, 3,800 staff. Big focus there is on quality control and indeed obviously safety. They have their second factory in Maxtown for heat pumps. So a little bit more recent in terms of products, 2,400 staff there. And then they have their head office in Central City, 2,600 staff there. So ballpark staff, 8,800 people across three main areas, two manufacturing units and indeed head office where I guess you as senior manager will be based too. Moving on to our next point is really the financials. I've said that this is a successful business. How successful are they? Well, very successful. Revenues in the most recent year to December 21, 756 million Norland dollars, and that is up year on year. PBT at 113 million, again up year on year. And if we look at the dividend distribution in the last financial year, 42 million, which makes a DPR or a dividend payout ratio of 43%, pretty sizable. We are given some information on the share price. The current price per the chart in the pre-scene looks to be around about 47 Norland dollars. Recently, we had a pretty big peak or a spike in the share price. June 22 looks to be around about $67, but it's now come down, sitting at 47. Just looking back over the last 3 years or thereabouts in terms of the change in the share price, or indeed the uplift, pretty significant. If we go back to the very first month in that chart, May 2019, we're talking about a share price of 22 Norland dollars. So really from May 19 through to the current date, we're talking about a 114% increase, broadly in 3 years or just over. That's pretty significant. We see that the beta, according to the chart, is 1.12. So these shares are just that little bit more volatile than the market itself. So that's the financials. What about the revenues and indeed the split? Well, I've said that there are two main products. We've got heat pumps and we've got boilers. So total revenues, 756 million, as mentioned up top, Norland dollars, and that's an increase note year on year of 8%. So how is that split down in absolute terms? Well, the heat pumps, 416 million Norland dollars, and the boiler side, 340 million. Now, I've also said that they export outside of Northland. So what's the split there between home and exported products? Well, home base, $423 million, and the exports, 333 million. So a pretty sizable export element there. Now, in terms of the exporting, what we're told is that most of the exports are going to countries that are fairly close geographically. Okay, and a point to note here is that in terms of their revenues and indeed their competition, they do have several competitors. The main one, I guess the most important one I think for us, is Thermwick. Okay, that's a company that's also Norland based. They provide cheaper, slightly less efficient boilers and products, heat pumps, but it seems to me that they're quite popular because their revenues are 801 million, so slightly bigger than our company, Hottayr. Next point is about who's involved in running this company. So at the top we have our CEO, Dr. Eva de Volder. Now, she's been in position as the CEO for 2 years, but know that she's been with the company for 24 years. Her background is as an engineer. Alongside Eva are the 4 executive directors, and it looks from the breakdown of their backgrounds that they have a pretty broad, wide experience in a variety of different areas. On the non-executive side, we have the chair, Martin Gregory. Now, his background is as a lawyer. He's a retired lawyer, was a partner in a law firm. Alongside him, just 3 Neds. And indeed, when you look at the Ned's background, you want a bit issue there in terms of diversity. 2 out of the 3 other Neds really come from a political or sort of government background, which could be a little bit of an issue from a corporate governance sense. They do, though, have the 4 main committees, as we would expect. Now, let's remember that certainly for the SCS exam, corporate governance has got to be up there as one of our sort of top 10 to 15 topics. Let's be on the basics of corporate governance, and let's be prepared for some problematic areas in that vein. So that's number 7. Let's move on to number 8 in terms of ownership of this entity. Now, it's a listed company. We're not given any detail as such. We see the issued share capital in the most recent financial accounts as 250 million Norland dollars. We see a dividend at fairly sizable level of 42 million. Now, in terms of ownership, I think we can sort of safely say that this listed entity, given the fact that it's been around for a number of years in a fairly stable growing market, steady growth as it were, will probably be similar to most listed entities, certainly of this ilk. So I think we can say that institutional investors will probably account for around about 40% or thereabouts. Free floaters, for example, you and me, people investing in the markets, probably around about 25 to 30. And then outside of that, the sort of third group would probably be sort of private corporations and indeed public bodies, perhaps around about 20% to 25. So that's the broad breakdown I expect for a listed company of this ilk. Note also that in relation to ownership, we do have fairly significant borrowings on the face of the balance sheet, and indeed, therefore, a fairly high gearing. What, 200 million Norland dollars? We're not told anything, but more than likely, given a company in this industry of this ilk, probably bank borrowings in some way, shape, or form. Ninth point is competition. Now, I've touched on the main competitors. Let me give you a breakdown of the two of them. The first one, as mentioned, is Thermwick. Now, in terms of their size, as mentioned, in terms of revenue, slightly bigger than Hottayr. They are Norland based. They're certainly offering a product that seems to be a little bit more popular than the Hottayr product. People are voting with their wallets to a certain extent. Now, Thermwick are more boiler focused than heat pump focused. Note, maybe that's part of the reason, okay? The next main competitor, as mentioned in the pre-scene, is Flounsey. Now, they're based in a neighbouring country called Eastland. Now, Eastland has a colder climate, and they are the market leader in Eastland. They have a similar quality profile to Hottayr, and indeed, a little bit like Thermwick, they're more boiler focused than they are heat pump focused. Okay, that's number 9. Number 10 really for me is sort of gut instincts on hot topics or areas that I think that we should start thinking about now and get them set in our mind. Now, each of these topics could be easily picked up from the risk register that we see within the pre-scene. The first one is really that the products offered by Hottayr are expensive. To replace your boiler or to upgrade your boiler to a heat pump costs a lot of money. So really, the economy, the state of the economy is definitely relevant for companies like this. Okay, I think linked into that, the whole area of their price and indeed their overseas trade, the fact that they do depend upon overseas trade, foreign jurisdictions, leaves them open to economic issues outside of the home country for sure, and then over and above that, possible currency issues too. Okay, so that's really the first point. The second point that I think is pretty easy to see, and it's mentioned a number of times within this particular pre-scene, is the whole environmental area and the whole CSR stance. We're talking about everything from impact of global warming and climate to possible changes in legislation going forward. So really the social responsibility and indeed moving with the times, both in terms of, the focus of customers and the needs of customers, but also particularly the focus of government bodies and regulators is definitely something that must be on Eva's mind and indeed the board's mind going forward. Okay, so that really concludes 10 key points that we need to get under our belt now. Let's get savvy with this company. Remember, you are an employee. You are a senior manager. You're party to every aspect of this particular business. And indeed, we need to get savvy. We need to get you on board and thinking like a senior manager in a well-established manufacturer of heating systems. Okay? So listen, thanks for listening. Good luck with your studies. Please do join me for Intro to Industry shortly. Cheers.